Does the research show that red meat is killing you? That is the question of the day. Hello, this is Aishan, aka The Omnivorist. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner in Paris, France, and I'm passionate about helping busy moms recover their energy and vitality through real food and healthy habits. And welcome to my weekly series, Ask the Omnivorist, Food and Health Nuggets for Busy Mamas. And this is episode 2 of my 3-part series on red meat. Last week, I talked to you all about why having good quality, well-sourced, grass-fed meat can actually be good for your health. And if you haven't checked that out already, go ahead and do that. And this week, we're going to talk about what the research says or what it's all about. So we're all familiar with the media headlines that associate red meat and possibly its good friend, saturated fat, with negative health outcomes. Okay, it basically makes it sound like eating these foods is synonymous with playing Russian roulette with your health. If you type, red meat and health into Google, you will probably come up with all kinds of catchy titles like 10 reasons to ditch red meat, or why red meat is giving you, might increase your chances of, getting type 2 diabetes, or, and the like. But do those sexy headlines, hold up to scrutiny when you actually look underneath and look at the small print? And you might be surprised actually what you find out. For example, when you, most times, or oftentimes when you look at a study, when you look at the actual paper, you will see that the authors of the paper have actually included a whole bunch of disclaimers that actually make it difficult to draw easy conclusions from their findings. But unfortunately, this kind of nuance doesn't often make it to the press release. Because let's face it, this kind of this kind of nuance just doesn't sell, right? Now, one thing to understand about nutrition science in general is that many of these studies that nutrition depends upon, they are what are called observational studies, okay? So these are the kinds of studies where researchers will take a group of people, they will follow them across a given period of time, during which, they will be filling out food questionnaires, the participants, and then the researchers will be measuring certain health markers. So this is how it's done. Now, just want to make sure so this kind of study will have something like, the conclusion of a study like this will say something like X factor, whatever that is, that might be red meat, that might be something else. X is associated with, it will always say associated with, because it can't say caused, and I will explain why. It associated with a Y% increase in Z disease, for example. Okay, that's the kind of conclusion that this kind of study will have. Now, you may already know that the gold standard for scientific research is double-blind control studies. But in nutrition, this is pretty hard. I mean, because of the nature of the beast. You can't exactly give people a placebo, right? Because they can see what they're eating. So unfortunately, these observational studies that we tend to rely upon in nutrition, they're actually pretty problematic, because one of the reasons is that, for example, food questionnaires are notoriously inaccurate, because let's face it, people have a really hard time recalling what they ate on any given day, or they may misrepresent or play it down or whatever it is. So that is one issue. And another important point is that, and now if you've taken any statistics or logic in school, you might be familiar with this. Correlation does not always mean causation. So what do we mean by that? I'll give you a classic textbook example. For example, you might say the statement, as ice cream sales go up, drowning rates go up. Okay, so obviously these two things are correlated, which means they're going up. We observe that they're going up at the same time, but you can't really draw a causative conclusion between the two of them. It's not because of ice cream that people are drowning more, but rather there's another cause. There is the fact that the weather is warm. It's when people tend to buy more ice cream and tend to go swimming more, right? So that is a typical example. So what I mean by this is that, let's say that any given an observational study shows a correlation between red meat intake and certain health risks. It is really difficult then to really control for all the different elements that may have played into that risk increase and to separate red meat from anything else. That's why these studies usually say associated with, and they can't really make that causal statement. Now, the other thing to understand is that even when there's a risk factor or a risk increase that is maybe worthwhile looking into, you have to also understand the difference between absolute risk versus relative risk. So what do I mean by this? For example, let's say that you have any given person or any given population has a 5% chance of developing a certain condition in their lifetime. Okay. That's called an absolute risk. They have a 5% chance. And you might see a headline that says such and such thing, increase is associated with a 20% increase in your chances of developing such condition. And that at first sounds impressive, right? 20%. But if you think about it, if you do the math, that means it went from 5% to 6%. That's a bit anticlimactic, isn't it? So that's another thing that is important to understand. So when you look closer, you see the picture gets a little murkier. However, all of this being said, there are certain troubling associations between red meat intake and certain health issues or certain phenomena in the body that are perhaps worth looking into. Actually, it turns out red meat consumption, drum roll, may increase your chances of developing cancer. But this is the big thing. Context is key. Now, this has been observed in the context of people eating a standard Western diet or a standard American diet, SAD, which means without sufficient fiber and vegetable intake. Okay? It turns out, actually, remember my lesson from last time about including much more plant food, much more vegetables and leafy greens and all of that in your plate than the animal protein portion, because it tends to be a smaller volume because it's more nutrient dense. This turns out to be also protective and beneficial. So all the protective factors you get from eating all those plant foods will actually allow you to benefit from the nutrition of the animal protein or the red meat without the ill effects. Okay? And another thing to consider is that, remember, these participants were eating a standard Western diet, which means that the red meat, the quality of the red meat they were eating was also not exactly what we were talking about last time, that good quality grass-fed whole food red meat. They were also eating a lot of processed red meat. So that's something to keep in mind. And last but not least, gut health seems to play an important role in this. Having improper gut ecology tends to be, apparently, it turns out that it can cause you to metabolize meat poorly. So those gut bacteria actually are they can be really our friend here as well. And I did do an episode on probiotic foods and this issue a few episodes back. So do make sure to check that out, as well as the first 2 episodes of this series all about real food. All right. So, okay. And there's one more thing that I wanted to mention, and that is, let's say you went and got yourself, wonderfully sourced, good quality meat. How do you prepare it? Now, cooking method is important as well. Charring your steak to oblivion on an open grill is not such a great idea. That process apparently can introduce harmful chemicals into your meat that are problematic for your health. One way to mitigate this is by using marinades. Okay, again, another traditional practice that turns out to be for a very good reason. If you marinate your meat a few hours ahead in something acidic like lemon juice or vinegar, that actually mitigates those effects. But in general, also try to prefer gentler cooking methods, especially, for example, when there's liquid. So stews, for example, that's a better way to eat your meat. So yeah, let's again. If we stick to real whole foods, basing our diet on real whole foods with properly sourced red meat that is cooked properly, wild seafood, tons of seasonal veggies and leafy greens and fruits, lacto-fermented foods, bone broth. In other words, upping your nutrient density while lowering your consumption of potentially inflammatory foods like processed foods and grain-based foods, then in the context of such a diet, your red meat can actually be really good for you. Okay? So just to wrap it all up, my bottom line for you so far is that the research can be less straightforward than it might at first seem, and some of the negative associations may actually become irrelevant when you take into consideration the quality of your meat as well as the quality of your overall diet. Something I mentioned last time, making sure to eat the whole animal and eating a variety of animals is also important. Also, preferring gentler cooking methods and marinades when you want to barbecue, and including probiotic foods in drinks as much as possible, if possible every day. That is beneficial as well. So that's what I have for you today. Be sure to tune in next week as I delve into the ethical and ecological considerations all around red meat production. So, and if you haven't already, make sure to join our free Facebook group, the Mama Reboot Community, to get more tips and tricks from me and to get a backstage pass into my own kitchen. I will post the links for that in the comments below. And if you've liked this video, if you found it useful, please make sure to like it and perhaps share it with somebody else who can benefit. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you right here next week.